Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and very good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the organizing committee for accepting our paper to be presented in ICOMSAT 4. Indeed, my topics today will be on the Singapore state capitalism and its contributions to the neighboring countries' economy, especially here is Indonesia and Malaysia. This paper is an outcome of our research project, and my teams, myself, and Albertus Severianus, Reseno Aji Afandi, and Dayu Nirma Amurwanti. And this has been funded by PIB 47, which is International Research Fund of BINUS. Well, my content for today's discussion will be only three things. First is talking about Singapore state capitalism. What do you mean by state capitalism? The second is what is the contributions of the Singapore economic development to the neighboring countries, i.e., for example, Malaysia, and the second is Indonesia. And I emphasize by the tools how Singapore, for example, contributed to the both countries' economic growth. First is through direct investment. The second is through bilateral trade. And finally, I'll conclude the remark of my presentation. Well, what is meant by state capitalism? State capitalism, it is a social system that combines capitalism with ownership and control of means of production by state, which act like a single huge corporations. So therefore, when the business, for example, and the economic activities being controlled by the state, or the state has a huge percentage of capital in that particular business, then it's been associated with the state capitalism. And of course, Singapore government has introduced the so-called state capitalism, as well as open trade and globalizations. Indeed, there had been liberalization process in Singapore's history. And therefore, this paper aims to analyze how does Singapore state capitalism has played a part in the economic development of its neighboring countries, i.e. Malaysia and Indonesia. Well, this paper based on a qualitative method. Our team used primary as well as secondary data. In analyzing data, researchers apply thematic analysis. By utilizing this method, the researchers will be able to gain insight, knowledge on Singapore contribution to neighboring countries, namely Malaysia and Indonesia. Well, our finding is very simple. The first, Singapore state capitalism, means that Singapore's government-linked companies, which has been, of course, dominated all the business sectors. Based on the data, for example, out of 100 companies in Singapore, almost 62 were government-linked companies. Yeah, and of course it has grew to some extent, and GLCs contributed to 12.9% of Singapore GDP in 1998. And currently, if you look at it, for example, Temasek net portfolio reached at almost 381 billion Singapore dollars. I mean, it's very huge. And Temasek Holding, as known as a global investment company owned by Singapore government, almost possessed 20% or more in 20 companies, which is very outstanding companies, including in telecommunication, in energy, in other sectors as well. So therefore, GLCs have undergone reconstructions to become world-class enterprises. Of course, the Singapore does not reluctant to recruit the international professionals and expertise, for example, to work and to enhance the capabilities of their own GLCs. And by doing so, this Temasek as well as the other government-linked companies has played a significant role in economic development in domestic, as well as at the same time, the Singapore also has contributed to the development of economy in Southeast Asia, especially to neighboring countries, Malaysia and Indonesia. And if you noted, for example, Singapore does not mean a red dot in the map, but Singapore has been shining all the regions because Singapore has more developed and contributed to the development of neighboring countries. And what is the Singapore contribution to neighboring countries? And I said that, and I found in the research, Singapore has increasing importance to Malaysia and Indonesia in terms of FDI. As the city-state may not be largest contributor to FDIs in Malaysia, but the amount of money invested in Malaysia has grown from only 1.4 billion ringgit in 2015 to now is 5.61 billion ringgit Malaysia in 2019, and finally reached in 2020 to 10 billion. This amount of the foreign direct investment. And as we know that Malaysia focus on manufacturing sectors, and therefore through that FDI, Malaysia can really provide the employment as well as the what they call manufacturing countries. And Malaysia has succeeded in exporting the end goods from manufacturing, for example, is quite well. And therefore, the economic development has been gradually increasing yearly. And it's been known from data we took that Singapore has very significant investors, especially in FDI. In 2019 as well, Singapore is becoming number 3rd from the total FDIs came into Malaysia. And 2020, if you look at it, Singapore is number 2. So it's becoming increasingly important for Malaysians' economic development. At the same time, if you look at it, for example, to Indonesia, Singapore has been number 1 source of foreign investment in Indonesia for many years. The amount of money invested by Singapore in Indonesia is growing each year from 5.9 billion USD in 2015 into almost 9.8 billions in 2020. So this is the big amount, USD, not Sing dollar, to the Indonesian economic. At the same time, Singapore contributed to the neighboring countries is through bilateral trade, especially Indonesia and Malaysia. As we know that the locations of Singapore has been neighboring with Malaysia and Indonesia. Malaysia's balance of trade has achieved surplus for 23 consecutive years by 2020, where the country's total export was 980.98 billion ringgit as compared to its total import 796.19 billion ringgit. And Singapore was the Malaysian largest export destinations. It's very huge. So therefore, this is a very small but developed without natural resources. But Malaysia, on the other hand, is supply what has been needed for domestic as well as for the export purposes. So therefore, the Singapore companies, especially GLCs, made transactions with the Malaysian product, and then they re-export it to other countries. Due to their own facilities and infrastructures, and export-import is very a convenience. So therefore, Malaysians exported the items, the goods, manufacturing to Singapore, and Singapore exported to other countries. So therefore, how Singapore helped and contribute to the economic development for their own neighboring countries, especially Malaysia and Indonesia. So Singapore was still number 4th place for Indonesia export destinations, with almost 7.70%, and the 3rd place for the Indonesian source of import. Indonesia more imports to Singapore rather than export. And what is the most partners in export? Of course, in Indonesia, China now is the largest partner in export. as well as in import. United States is number 1. Japan is number 3. But however, in import, Japan is number 4 and Singapore is number 3. Yeah. Next is India and the rest of the countries. So this is, therefore, I'm sure that Singapore has contributed to the economic development of the region, especially the largest country in Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia, and neighboring country, which is also next to their neighboring borders, Malaysia. Yeah. And as a result, from our paper, it has been found that the positive relationship between Singapore and its neighbors, particularly Indonesia and Malaysia, is demonstrated by the Singapore's investment in bilateral trade in those countries. In terms of FDI, Singapore has been the top source of foreign investment in Indonesia, and the amount of money invested by Singapore in Indonesia is growing from year to year. Meanwhile, Singapore may not be the biggest source of FDI in Malaysia, but has been consistently standing in top 5 of foreign investors in Malaysia. As such, that Singapore, though it is a very small state, but has contributed to the economic development of the largest country in Southeast Asia and neighboring countries in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much. I end. If there is any question, you can pose it. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.